Well, aloha, everybody, and welcome to Fast, Healthy, and Ono Cooking, sponsored by Kaunoa Senior Services on Maui, Uala Leaf Cafe on Oahu, as part of Windward Community College, and AARP Hawaii. My name is Jackie Boland. I'm the Community Outreach Director for AARP Hawaii, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. If you're not familiar with AARP, we are a membership organization for people 50 and older, but what we do for everyone. And it's our hope that with tonight's session, you'll be able to add another tool to your cooking toolbox and enable yourself to live a healthier lifestyle. And I do have to say, living in Hawaii, growing fresh herbs is easy. It's like the only thing that I save money with when I go to the grocery store is that I can grow my own herbs. Cleaning them and cooking them, that's a whole nother story. So I'm really looking forward to tonight's session and getting some tips and tricks from Chef Dan. Before we go further, I want to just point out that yes, we are closed captioning this tonight. And if you don't like that, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see something that says CC or live transcript. If you click on that, you can turn it off. If you want to change the way your screen looks, we recommend that you go up into the corner under View, choose Speaker View and Side by Side. And then if you look in between those pictures, you're going to see a little double white line. You can click on that and drag it to make either picture bigger or smaller. Also, we won't be accepting questions through the chat. Please use the chat if you have technical questions, and either Alice Swift or myself will answer them. If you have a question for Chef Dan, you can put it into the Q&A at any time. I'll try to look for a timely opportunity to ask him that question, and if not, we'll be spending the last 15 minutes of the program answering your questions. Oops, I just went the wrong direction. So without further ado, I do want to welcome Chef Dan Swift, who's our chef extraordinaire, and he's going to take it away and teach us how to do this cooking with fresh herbs. I hope you all enjoy the program.
Chef extraordinaire. I don't know about that, but hey, thanks, Jackie.
It's true. I stand by every word I said.
Awesome. Well, hopefully, can you see and hear everything okay?
Looking good.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. It smells great in here. We don't normally have this many fresh herbs all in one like small space. So it's a nice treat for myself as well. Quick shout out to Jackie Malley, who planted a number of weeks ago all of the pots that you see here. She has a big garden at home, but planned ahead to produce our display that we could utilize tonight for different recipes and instructional materials. I don't know, you probably can't read the little tags that she made. Mojito mint, and each of the herbs that she put together has one of those on there. I noticed there's not much mojito mint, so I'm not really sure if Jackie's going through that a lot, but I'll talk to her later and find out. But what I wanted to do tonight, we're not doing a lot of cooking. We're talking about, at least my perspective, on herbs and their uses and some sort of broad categories of the types of herbs that are often used in the kitchen, the most popular ones, most of which you'll see here. And, washing them, cutting them. As Jackie said, they're easy, really easy to grow. The last week, maybe a little bit too much rain, depending on where you're located. But in large part, if they're outside, if they're watered and they're getting enough sun, most of them can be grown really easily at home. So we are very fortunate in that regard. So feel free to ask questions. I'm sure there's some green thumbs out there that probably have a lot more experience than me in terms of the growing side of things, or even tricks that you guys might have. So feel free to chime in the Q&A, or pass a question along so that I get it. I'd be happy to answer it. What I wanted to do first is I've separated these two batches of herbs into two primary categories. And one I call like leafy and salad-like greens. These are the ones that, at least for me, I have no problem just eating fresh and straight. In that category, I've listed some of them here. Parsley, and that's all of the parsleys. Cilantro, which is called Chinese parsley, would fall into that category as well. Tarragon, basil, chives, dill, other items like that, like mint, that can just be picked and eaten straight. So I always kind of refer to those as like leafy or salad-like greens. These are the fresher, more crisp type greens that don't really need to be necessarily chopped finely or cooked at all. They can be thrown whole leaf into a salad or many of the dishes that we have or try in restaurants today. So that's one category, and that's what I have over here with the parsleys. We've got cilantro, American parsley, and Italian parsley. A couple kinds of mint here, the mojito and the spearmint. Here's some chives, I think 2 types, garlic and onion chive. Basil, which is kind of hard to see right now, it's a little bit small, but there's a Thai basil, which will always have the purple stem, and a sweet basil with a bigger, broader leaf and a green stem. And then up here, this is dill. Harder for me to grow. I've never really been that successful growing dill, but this is great with fish and chicken. It's really, really light, very delicate. Works great for a lot of different dishes like that. And then over here on this side, well, this is my pesto setup. So let me move that for a second. There's just a couple that I have here on display. One is rosemary, very common. This will grow into a hedge at home if you allow it to do so. There's a few different types of rosemary. Actually, there's a few different types of most of these today. But it is very hardy. It works great with chicken. These are the ones that I sort of classify as the hardy or earth-like, earthy type herbs. They're very robust. They're very, I don't want to say musky, but they have a real earthy tone to most of them. So they tend to go well with like your red meats or red wine sauces and items like that. Still very versatile, but generally would want to be cooked and or chopped up finely. You don't normally just eat a sprig of rosemary, though you'll see it oftentimes on a plate as a garnish. You wouldn't really want to chew on it because it's a little woody, I guess. Sage is another one that falls into that category. I love the smell of sage. This grows crazy here. There's some really broadleaf ones that are out there now. We just planted our herbs at home. This is actually a small leaf from it, which is much bigger than most of the leaves that you'll get on the narrower plant. So very versatile with poultry and the hardy earthy style type items that you'll be cooking at home. And then in the back, we have thyme and oregano. Marjoram would sort of fall into this category as well. There's loads of different kinds of thyme. There's lemon thyme. There's even a chocolate thyme now. So you can get really creative when you're planting your pots. And what we did at home was we put 2 to 3 different types of each herb in the larger pots that we're growing. So we can sort of see how they react together and which ones we like best. So yeah, remember in general and broad terms, and this is just myself or what I teach students that are starting out in the kitchen is kind of think of your light salad-like leafy herbs that can be eaten straight like a salad. And then the other category would be your hardy, earthy, kind of musty type herbs that are more often cooked with the items that you're making and chopped. Far less are they served straight. Thyme's a little different because the leaves are so small. You might just pick those leaves and throw them in. But in general terms, most of these are chopped in some way. It smells really nice. Any questions about that, Jackie?
We have quite a few questions, not necessarily about that. I'm going to save the gardening questions to the end since you're not really a gardener. But Shar is asking, when you're cooking with fresh herbs compared to dried herbs, do you use more or less?
You always use less when you're dealing with dry. because the oils and the flavors have dried and condensed. Basically, we've lost that moisture, and you do not need to use as much if you're using dry. Normally, dry can go into a dish in the early stages. It really helps with your herbs and spices a lot of times to put them in the beginning of your cooking process. If you're sauteing something, it might go in even with the oil, and then it releases the flavor. It basically flavors the oil, and then you can add your vegetables or chicken or whatnot. Fresh herbs, on the other hand, go in at the end. You don't want them to cook too long and break down. They've got the moisture. You don't want to lose all of their color, but they're always generally added at the very end of the cooking process. So yeah, great question. Use less of the dry, and you can add it in the beginning. You need a little bit more of the fresh, and you add it at the end.
Okay, so I don't want to prohibit you from moving into the demo, but how long do store-bought herbs last? And I'm not sure. I think this means dried store-bought herbs.
Yeah, I mean, for fresh herbs that are bought at the store, if you're not using them, just make sure you take them out of the fridge, lay them out, and let them dry. You can create your own dry herbs. So once they're dried, then they can be kept in a jar somewhere that's and it works really well, and it can last for really honestly months at a time.
Okay, terrific. And the last question I'll ask is, are you going to be talking about lemongrass at all today? Because Linda bought some lemongrass and has no idea what to do with it.
Oh yeah, that's I don't have any here, but I can certainly offer some recommendations. Normally, you're just using the base. They can be about this long, but what you're using is that root part. Normally, you'll cut it off maybe about like this, and generally, I would recommend for most dishes, it's a flavoring in a sauce. You would smash it, so you can just put it on a board or on your counter and take a mallet and just crush it so that it stays together, but that it will release the aromas, and then that stock would go into a curry sauce or something like that, and you'll get that flavor from it.
Okay, Dan, I just want to let you know you had a technical shift. Your long shot camera has disappeared, and we have both of them close-ups now.
Okay, I noticed that.
Alice, maybe you can climb in there and help, and Dan,
Alice,
just go ahead and continue.
I saw that shift, sorry. Oh, how's that? There we go. That work?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you. You don't want to just see my hands moving like I'm talking with my hands all the time. Really quick, I just wanted to show actually two things. If you got the recipes, then you'll have these sachet and a bouquet garni. These are two items that are used a lot in the kitchen, classic European style. But I only wanted to show them because I always think of these as almost like a herbal tea bag. So you don't have to make them with the traditional items. You could do it with the lemongrass, some ginger, some peppercorns, Szechuan peppercorns or whatever, to create your own sort of flavoring. And basically what they're done is then tied up with a string. We use butcher's twine. So in this case, I have the bouquet garni, which is the outside of a leek, which is like a large green onion. I picked one up at the store today. We just used the green part for this. Wash it really well because they get really dirty. Thyme, parsley, a couple bay leaves, and then we fold it up, and it's basically just tied in a knot. And that all that does is hold it together so that you can remove it when the sauce is done, or the item that you're cooking. Maybe it's a chicken stock or a chicken soup. You throw this in, you'll get all of the flavors from the bouquet garni, and then when you're done, you can just simply remove it by the string. So you get the flavor, but you don't have to use the item inside. So bouquet garni is traditionally used for a lot of classic sauces. And then the other probably more common one is a sachet. And this particular one has garlic, thyme, parsley stems, a couple bay leaves, and some peppercorns. And it's done in a cheesecloth or I'm just using a coffee filter today. Those work great. You just fold it up, just like a little bag for tea. And then the same thing here. We're just tying a string around the outside. Do a simple knot. and then that would be dropped into the stock. And again, the flavors come through in the garlic, the peppercorns, and all those other items. And then when you're finished, you can just remove it from the pot. So that's a really good way to like add flavors or to utilize those herbs that you might have bought that are starting to turn. You dry them out or whatnot. And you can create your own sachet or bouquet garni to flavor your stocks or your sauces. Okay. So I'm going to make pesto next. We only have a couple things on the menu today to make. One is pesto, because we're trying to come up with ideas and things that you can use fresh herbs for. This is a little bit different than a lot of your traditional pestos. And feel free to interrupt, Jackie, if you have a question or two. But you'll notice that in this recipe, if you have it, I'm not using Parmesan cheese. Breaks my heart a little bit. Mainly to reduce the amount of fat that would be in it. And then we also are pulling out the pine nuts. Those are two traditional items that are always in a classic pesto, but with nut allergies today and trying to make this a little bit more healthy, we've removed those two items. It also substantially reduces the cost of the dish as well.
But is it pesto if it doesn't have pine nuts in it? And how does that affect the flavor?
The predominant flavor is always the basil. As a matter of fact, you'll see here, I'm using spinach, about 4 cups, and then a cup of basil. So this is a way to get a lot more pesto for a lower cost, depending on whether or not you have an abundance of basil or something growing at home. But it's not as inexpensive as spinach. So this is just one bunch of spinach. I also have I saw some arugula at the store. This is baby arugula. I love making a pesto with arugula. It's a really nutty green. If you get the hearty baby ones, it works great. All of the same ingredients, but a totally different flavor. In industry, we'll also use cilantro to make a form of pesto. So I guess the short answer to the question is that you can still call it a pesto. Is it a classic pesto? Probably not, but it's still very flavorful and delicious. So when I started in restaurants, we made our pesto with dry basil and dry parsley. In Idaho, we didn't really use fresh herbs. It was just parsley on a plate as a garnish, next to an orange wedge, like you get at Denny's or something. But back in that time, we were just using dry herbs for all those things. So I'm just putting it all in the food processor. For me, it's a little bit easier to work with. I've got the basil, the garlic, some olive oil. I've got a little extra oil here too if I need it. The spinach, I'll probably just start with about half of the spinach and make sure that it blends up really well. And then a little bit of lemon juice. You want the liquid in the bottom to help puree the basil. So I'm just catching the seeds.
So Linda's wondering, does it matter if you use Thai basil or regular basil?
You'd get 2 different flavors. Sweet basil and Thai basil are a little bit different in flavor, but not dramatically. If you've watched the show at all, we're always encouraging people to think outside the box. So I'm glad, Jackie, you asked the question about, is it really a pesto? If you're talking to a traditional Italian chef, they'd probably say no. Same thing with sachets. If you deviate from the traditional ingredients in there, they'd probably say no. But what we want to do is encourage people to try things that are different and utilize the items that you have at home. And who knows, you might come up with something incredibly nice. A mint-based pesto would be great on a number of items, right? It would be good on shrimp. It could be good on a lot of different things. So
we have people asking, but does it taste good? They're going to have to try it themselves, right?
Yeah, of course it tastes good if you like mint or if you like spinach or if you like basil. But you can always adjust those flavors. You can add some heat. You can do lime instead of lemon. Lots of different variations there. So I'm just going to blend this up for a minute. And then, of course, if you need a stress reliever and you want to do it by hand, you can always use a mortar and pestle. There's a lot of different sizes and styles out there. It takes a lot longer, but this could be used as well to grind up your garlic, and then your nuts, and then your cheese, and then your herbs finally in the end. So it's up to you. I also listed on the recipe that you can use a blender, and I've done it before in really large batches with the blender, but you need to go heavier on the oil because of the setup of a blender. You need to have enough liquid in the bottom to blend it together. So
there's a big chat going on about different kinds of basil, and people are asking, can you please repeat what was in the sachet? Although if you want to wait until after we do the pesto, you can.
Yeah, let me turn this on. I'll open it up. And you can look that up online, the classic version. And it would have cheesecloth, but cheesecloth is really expensive. You probably have coffee filters at home. And I'll just put it out here. And you can hear that's wet enough to where it's slapping around. You could then come back. I'm going to taste it first. You always have to taste it. See if it needs more acidity. Does it need more garlic? In this case, I'm going to add a little bit more lemon juice. So I used about a half of a lemon. There's a little bit more juice in this, so I'm going to do a full half lemon. And be not cautious, just be aware when you're using lemons. You might have a recipe that calls for the juice of one lemon, but one lemon is not the same as another lemon. Some are extremely juicy, others are really dry. So you just have to sort of check it. And one other thing I'd recommend is always try to use the zest before you juice it. I didn't do that tonight just because of time, but if you zest it, add that to your item, pesto or whatever, and then the juice, it stretches the lemon flavor a little further.
And Dan, did you have any tips on cleaning those herbs? Because I know for me, a lot of times it's not that I don't have the herbs, it's just that it's such a pain to clean them. Or how do you know if they're clean enough?
Yeah, it is a pain, or it certainly can be. Even with spinach, the spinach I got was fresh, and then the bunches and any item like that, or a leek that grows in dirt or mud, you want to clean really well. So you've got to just take the time to pick through it.
That wasn't the answer that I was looking for.
I'll show. Yeah, there's no fast and easy way necessarily, unless you fill up a big sink or a big bucket with ice water and you throw it in there and you really submerge it, and all of the dirt will settle to the bottom. And, those are one of the tricks that we would do to get it, but you still have to pick through it, right? When you're cutting or removing any of the herbs, you got to look for bugs. You've got to look for dirt, look for dead leaves, remove it. It's just, it takes a little nurturing. So it's a little bit easier if you buy it already washed and already in a bunch. But if you're doing it at home, you just need to take that little bit of extra time. So I don't know if you guys can see here, there's a lot of dirt. Leeks in particular are grown in mud, basically, and it gets all down inside here. So if I were to peel back all of these layers, you can even see the mud clumps here. That little brown dot is a dot of mud water. So it really needs to be washed very, very carefully. Which is probably why a lot of people don't use leeks. They just use a green onion instead.
And soaking leaves in water isn't good enough?
It works great. And if they start to get limp, like these, Jackie, when she dropped these off today, said they were a little bit limp, but with all the rain we got and a little bit cooler temperatures, they kind of sprung back. So you'll find that's the case, especially with your light leafy greens like cilantro or parsley. If they start to get a little soft and wilted, you can put them in ice water for 3 to 5 minutes or so, take them out, shake them off, put them in a jar. I'll usually put them in a jar, a plastic container with water, like a plant, and a damp paper towel. Put them in the fridge and they'll crisp back up. So there's little tricks like that that you can utilize to make it easier. And the
Okay.
sachet here, you can see there's the thyme, parsley stems, bay leaf, black peppercorns, and garlic. Those are the items that are traditionally in that.
And Sharon's asking, is sweet basil the same plant as Italian basil?
That's correct, yes. And there are more varieties. Now, those are the two primary ones that we're used to here, Thai and sweet basil. Sweet being the Italian variety, the broader leaf. Thai being the purple stem, skinnier, a little bit more robust leaf, holds up better, easier to grow. But I have no doubt that there are multiple types of basil being created now, probably chocolate basil and all of those, just like thyme. Thyme is probably the broadest one, where I think there's at least 4 or 5 varieties when we went to the nursery a few weeks ago.
Thank you. There's lots of questions, but since we're running out of time, I think we should let you cook for a minute.
Okay. And then I just want to show you, I have some here that was in the freezer. I don't know, the lighting might not be good enough to tell how fresh it is. So here's the one with spinach. One thing I love about the spinach, nice and bright green, and the basil. You'll still get that with basil, but spinach will maintain its color a little bit better. This was in the freezer. So we had a bunch of basil, we made pesto, and we froze it. So you can do that and it'll last just fine, but it just loses its color. But it'll still work great for that. So I'll set that aside. That's just going to be for the pasta. I have a salsa fresca that I wanted to just throw together. It's super simple. It's got the diced tomatoes, onions, garlic. And then here I'm using marjoram, chives, or excuse me, oregano, chives, parsley, and cilantro. So a lot of herbs in here, a little salt and pepper, and a little bit of olive oil. This could also take some lemon or lime juice. I have another half here. I'm going to add a couple drops. It just depends on how acidic your tomatoes are. If they're really acidic, then you don't necessarily need that. But this is a really nice, simple, fresh type salsa that would be good on pasta. It's a good way to utilize the herbs that you might have. Any of these would work in here just fine. And on the recipe at the bottom, I put a note also that you could take this sauce or the salsa, put it on the stove on low heat, simmer it, and make a tomato sauce as well. But this is just so simple. And it can be done with mango. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be just tomato. Traditionally, it's tomato for the salsa. But look at the color on that. I mean, it turns out beautiful with all those herbs in there. Extremely flavorful. Work really well as a dip. It would work on a pasta. It would work for any number of things. Crostini would be good on top. Toasted French bread would be lovely. And then just the last thing, and then I'll answer all of the questions that you have. I just was setting up for a simple pasta salad. And I just used garden vegetables. So I had some of the tricolored peppers that I use all the time in the kitchen here. Those work great. I wanted to add some tofu. I didn't have chicken or didn't want to put any other cooked protein in there. So I drained the firm tofu and I have that, which works great. I blanched some broccoli and some cauliflower. So if you've watched our other programs, then you know blanching is boiling hot salted water where we just cook the vegetables for a very short period of time. In this case, it was only about 2 minutes. And then we strain it and cool it in ice water. And it's sort of basically pre-cooked a little bit. And then I have some blanched carrots and some artichoke hearts. So this is what we would kind of call, I guess, a pasta primavera, where there's lots of vegetables in a pasta. And I'm adding the pesto, so it's a pesto pasta primavera. And I'm using the nice fresh pesto that we had here. You can see that. And then I just have to mix that to coat the pasta and all of the vegetables. And this could have meat in it if you wanted chicken or shrimp or something else as well. Any other questions, Jackie, at the moment? You can go ahead.
Yes, there's a lot. Before we get to those questions, I just wanted to ask, for people who don't have a Cuisinart or a food processor, I know there are different techniques for cutting herbs, like rolling them together, etc. But do you have something that you recommend for people who are using a simple kitchen knife? Because I know when you're cooking for two or a small or yourself, sometimes you don't want to pull out that big apparatus and then have to clean it.
Yeah, I don't blame you for that. Good question. There you can see that's taken on the color now. And we've all seen pesto pasta in the store, in the restaurants. Very common, a really classic combination with the two. Even a little bit of cream and a hot sauce would make a pesto creamy sauce, which would work good. I would say, Jackie, for the easy cleaning, small stuff, if you're doing pestos, just pick up a small food processor. These are super easy to work with. And it just, the capacity is about 1.5 cups to 2 cups. Those work well if you're making a pesto. But if you want to cut herbs, and we can do some here, I'll just do the large leaves of sage as an example. So you're exactly right with the rolling and cutting of herbs. So your hardy ones, your ones that are nice and firm, and even some of the ones on this side, I'll show you, hold up really well to cutting, but they have to be cut relatively small. So what Jackie's mentioning, for those of you out there who want to cut more herbs at home, once you've cut them, usually with scissors or cut them from the plant with a knife, wash them, roll them up, and we can do what's called a chiffonade. So I think Jackie mentioned that she learned this not long ago and she was all excited about it. So let me see if I can change cameras. Hopefully it'll.
We're seeing both of them right now.
Oh, are you? Okay, good. So I just roll it up basically, from one end to the other. And then you take your knife and you just, as thin as possible, you cut little strips. And this would be done with like a kaffir lime leaf as well. In Thai cooking, it's very common. And you just carefully.
Can you cut the stem?
Yeah, on this case, I'm holding the stem when I get to the bottom. So I want to keep that. I have them all sort of together at the end. And that's going to be my handle when I get to the bottom. So if you work your way down, everybody's going to be a little different in terms of how thin you can cut it. But don't worry, just practice. And then you have the stems left in the end to hold on to. And then that I don't necessarily need. And then what that does is that produces this really fine ribbon of herbs. So the pieces are basically, almost like hairs. I'll lay them on this plate so that we can see them.
And then are there, besides, I know for cilantro, you just cut it and use the whole stem. Are any of these other herbs in that category where you use the whole stem?
Yeah, I tend to use a lot of the stems, honestly. Even I put it away, but I kept the stems from the spinach. I was going to use it in there. If I were making this pesto for myself, I would use those stems. I mean, you can go down quite a ways. Parsley, all of your tender leafy ones that we were talking about, like the salad-like ones. If I were to take this parsley and cut it, what you need to do is really just feel it and maybe take a piece. I would bite it if I weren't in front of you guys. And taste it. Is it too woody? Is it too firm for you to chew on? Would that work to cut? I'm going to say yes. So what I'll always do is, in this case, I'm kind of making like a little bunch. And you can see the stems come off the bottom. I'll take that bottom part off. But I have it all sorted together. And most of your parsleys, with the exception of cilantro, are very hardy. So you can just take them and roll them up, kind of like we did before. But we're not looking to do a chiffonade necessarily. Not for the finished product. I roll it into a nice little bundle like this. and then I do the same cut. But once I go one direction, I'm going to come back and go the other direction so that I can do some chopped parsley or minced parsley. So that went all the way through. Now I turn my knife. I don't even turn the product. I just turn my knife and then I go this way. Just keep scraping it into a small pile. And 15 seconds, you have your chopped parsley. That'll work really, really nicely for a sauce. And everyone's different. You can even, pick the leaves and cut them with scissors, depending on the size you're looking for. But the key is really to taste it. Is the stem too woody? I can feel the Thai basil here, too woody. If I were to pick a rosemary, and I'll just strip it down. That's a trick to like stripping it. A lot of them, you're going to go against it. I'll show you again really quick. Take a rosemary. And you can hear it snap, so it's very woody. But all of these are going this direction. So if you hold it at the top, then you can just pull your hand the opposite direction like this, and it peels off and just leaves the stem. So you have this, which would then be chopped up.
What about those little, when you do the rosemary, there's often that little white casing at the base of each leaf. Can you just cut that up?
The foamy part?
Yeah, it's like a little casing of white at the bottom of each one toward the stem. Is it okay to eat that?
And it looks like, does it look like foam?
I guess it looks more like a little pillowcase of white.
Yeah, usually I think that's a bug. That's a bug that's eating, and
Okay.
and it's creating some foam, and that's the little protective case that it builds around itself. So yeah, wash all that off. That's not part of the rosemary. So
now that everyone knows I've been eating bugs,
or you can try it. I mean, maybe it tastes good. I'm not sure. But a lot of times the rosemary is, it's just thrown in whole like this. So you would take it out, wash it, and then just throw this in your soup or your sauce as is. And then the leaves will break down and fall off. And then you just remove the stem when you're done. But some people, even that being the case, they might not want a piece of herb that's this big. They want a little bit smaller. If that's the case, you can, of course, do the same. Bundle it up, come back, chop it one direction, and then the other. And you can go to town. Some people just go crazy on it, super, super fine. It's up to you. But remember, rosemary is strong and it's fibrous, so you don't want a big giant piece of rosemary in your food.
Okay, so Deborah is asking, are there any herbs that cannot be frozen? And does it affect your flavor if you freeze them?
It affects the flavor a little bit. It affects more than anything the texture. So we had some basil today that I'd taken out of the freezer that was shipping on. Because we had a bunch of it. We put it in water and we froze it. I drained it and it was like a clump of a kind of black mess. So I didn't even use it. I just threw it away. So yeah, the hardier items will freeze much better than your tender ones. You're almost never really going to freeze parsley or cilantro and items like that unless it's in a pesto form. So if it's just by itself, you're better off drying it instead of freezing it.
Great. And then Pam is pointing out that frozen peas taste really good in pesto, which I've never tried.
Yeah.
Anonymous, folks, if you ever could sign in with your names, it would be so nice. But Anonymous would like to ask, does it help to spray some vinegar in the water to clean them when rinsing fresh herbs and vegetables? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, it probably couldn't hurt if you're washing it quickly. I'm not really sure that there'd be a benefit to it necessarily. Acidity breaks down certain things. It makes other things firmer. But you know, I mean, vinegar is not that expensive, or lemon juice. Well, I'm not going to say that. Lemons are now like $1 a piece at the store. So I'm not really sure the science of what's going on. It would depend on the herb, but I don't think it's necessary. Sort of like pasta, when you cook pasta, you don't need to put oil in your water. And that's a traditional thing that a lot of people do. But when you drain the pasta, then the oil just ends up going down the drain. Generally, when you oil your pasta, it's after you've strained it. So if you're cooking pasta in salted water only and then draining it or rinsing it for later use, you would then toss it in oil so it doesn't stick together. But yeah, I mean, some people may do vinegar. I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing. It's sort of up to you.
Okay. Before we go to the next question, I want to let Patricia Chappelle, Marguerite Aki, and Lucy Maloney know that you won a door prize. I put my email in the chat. You can email me your mailing address by Friday of next week if you'd like to claim that prize. So that's Patricia Chappelle, Marguerite Aki, and Lucy Maloney. Look in the chat for my email. Ron would like to know, is there a colorful herb that you could use to make that pesto that's not green if you wanted it to be some sort of non-green alternative?
Yeah, well, there's opal basil, which used to be really popular years and years ago. I think I just saw it when we were getting herbs, but I didn't pick it up. And opal basil is a purple color, so it will make a nice purple colored pesto. So if you're looking for something a little bit different like that, that would be great. Most of your greens, though, tend to be, or most of your herbs tend to be green. I'm trying to think what else might be in there, but any leafy green that you see, like, you know, I mentioned arugula earlier, but you might see amaranth or some other green that is flavorful, like an herb, but it's leaning more towards the salad side of things. That would work. But you'd be, you know, there's not a lot of choices out there for that. Great question, but.
So speaking of that arugula, just to be clear, you're using the arugula to replace basil, or are you just adding it in? That's a question from Cindy.
Yeah, that's a great question. Either one. So I don't know, some of you may like arugula. Maybe some of you have never tried it before, but it's extremely nutty. I mean, it almost, it's just, I love it. It's peppery and nutty. So if I were using this, I might cut it with something mild like spinach so that it's not overpowering, but it's up to you. Those ratios are sort of dependent on your preference. If you love arugula, there's nothing wrong with making a pesto straight up with arugula. If you want to dial it back a little bit, you can do it with, like I said, a little bit of spinach. You could throw in a little bit of basil, whatever you'd like. Watercress also is really nice.
And Natalie wants to know, how about Swiss chard?
Absolutely. Yep. Would be great.
Okay. So MC would like to know, when you made that pasta, did you rinse it after cooking it, or did you just throw it in with all the other ingredients?
Great
I'm
question.
Guessing, yeah.
This we did rinse because we cooked it today at about 10:30. So we cooked it, we shocked it, and then tossed it in olive oil and wrapped it and set it in the cooler. So it will, that's one thing, a good question too. One thing to keep in mind in terms of pastas, and we, you know, mac salad is probably the most common thing that we eat, pasta salad wise here in Hawaii, but the pasta will absorb the flavor from your sauce, from this pesto in this case, and your vegetables. So it's really important that, one, you salt your water. When you boil your pasta, it should be salty, just like the sea. So like the ocean. So you know, I don't know what that is, like 3% or something. So salty water will flavor the pasta, so it's less likely to absorb the flavor from your dish, but it still will. And overnight, you'll notice you have to re-season. If you're saving a pasta salad the next day, you might try it. It's like dry. So you need to re-season it.
Okay, so we do have more questions, but I noticed we're 1 minute to time. So I wanted to let people know about a couple of exciting things. So one thing is that for all of you who have had trouble with the recipes, my colleague Shar is working on creating a website that basically has all the recipes. So after each session, we'll post the recipes on there. And she doesn't quite have it live yet, but once it's live, I'll email that to everyone because it seems like people don't see that recipe in the reminder a lot of the time. So yay, Shar, it's going to be really cool. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that we have launched all the April programs. If you're looking to sign up for some of the April events, and we have a really great lineup. I'm excited about it. I think the coolest one for me is the one that's going to be on April 1st, which is cooking in paper. I've never done that before, so I'm excited to learn that. But next week, we do have making the most of your beef rib. If you're planning that fancy prime rib dinner for Easter, this is a great time. But we're going to have Chef Dale talking to us about how to cut that if you want to make rib. I'm sorry, Dan. What's the kind of steak that's made from
Ribeye,
rib?
yeah, a ribeye steak. So he'll show the shaved thin roast, regular roast, and the ribeye steak.
So good. And then, of course, the last session in March is going to be really exciting because we're going to be learning how to make sort of a modified Beurre Blanc sauce and sear some ahi. I learned how to make Beurre Blanc during the pandemic, but it is definitely not a healthy sauce. So I'm looking forward to trying out Chef Dan's twist on that. But again, if you want to register for the cooking programs, that address at the bottom there under the cooking calendar, it should actually say https://aarp.cvent.com/hi cooking. It has everything listed on there. You can start signing up for those April classes now, but I think you're going to be excited about the lineup. And so, Dan, we do have some more questions. If you have time to answer them,
I got plenty of time. Yep, go ahead.
So for those of you who have to go, we completely understand and we thank you for joining us, but we'll just go ahead and finish off some of these questions. So on Facebook, Terry is asking for the pasta primavera salad recipe, but Dan, wasn't that the 5-herb pasta recipe that we sent out?
Yeah, it was, but all you have to do is cook whatever pasta you want. This is penne, but it can be any pasta. I actually cooked some whole wheat pasta today, but didn't think we'd have time. Add the pesto and your choice of fresh vegetables. Really, that's it. So it can even be frozen vegetable blend medleys. It can be some of the pre-cut ones that you find in the supermarket now, or whatever you find fresh on the shelf that you want to get and utilize. So allow creativity to take over and just use what you like and what's fresh and make your own creation.
Okay, great. And then somebody was asking earlier, and this is more of a plant growing question, but if you grow multiple herbs in the same pot, does it affect the flavor?
You'll have to ask me in about a month and a half because we planted like herbs, but I'm guessing that if there is an impact, it would be very small. So here we've got our Greek oregano and thyme next to each other. By the time you pick the thyme, wash it, cut it, use it in your dish, you're probably not going to get any oregano flavor. It would be really cool if you did. And maybe that's how they're coming up with all these new herbs, but I don't think that you would get much flavor.
And I came up several times in the chat. Just want to warn people, if you're new to gardening, do not put your mint in with other things because the mint will just take everything over. And I love mint, but you can only make so many mojitos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Then that is, where can one buy lime basil?
Lime basil. That's a great question. I don't know that I've even seen it. I would call around probably your larger nurseries would be able to tell you. There may be a couple small vendors. I mean, once farmers markets, I think they're starting to work their way back. We may be able to ask some vendors there to find out, but I've never seen lime basil. That sounds very interesting and delicious.
Yeah, lemon basil's everywhere, yeah.
Yeah. And then
Okay,
Jackie, I was just going to say here, another item I meant to mention earlier, or if you have extra herbs that are starting to turn and you haven't used them all, I use them in vinegars. So this is tarragon that I put in just a distilled white, and this makes my favorite vinegar. It's our secret sauce for like cheese sauces and so many different dishes, soups. I'll add a tablespoon of this at the end, and you get that fragrant tarragon flavor and the acidity from the vinegar. So any of your herbs that you find that you may not want to dry, before you finish, you can put them in vinegar and wash them up. Yeah.
Okay. How long can pesto be kept in the refrigerator and stay tasty? That's from Priscilla.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with no preservatives and submerged in oil, it's almost, where did I put that one that I had here? I've got the older version of it. It always has a layer of oil on top that'll separate. So you really can, that means the oxygen's not getting to it. It's less likely to spoil. You should have no trouble with a month. But what I would do is just take it out.
A month in the refrigerator?
Yeah, no problem. No
wow.
problem. Yeah.
I would never have guessed that.
The health department will tell you 5 minutes and then you need to throw it away. But yeah, the trick and what I would encourage everyone to do if you really want to elevate your kitchen knowledge is taste everything. Taste that pesto at a week, taste it at 3 days, taste it at 10 days. You will learn how long things last. I'm a living experiment, and trust me, I can tell by smell and taste what stage things are at because I've spent my whole life just kind of learning and testing that before I throw something away. So the best thing you can do for yourself is to just constantly go back and taste those items. All right. So I would encourage folks to do that for sure.
Okay, and then we have a couple of things that, so apparently if you grow different kinds of basil in the same pot, they will transfer flavor. And then Kim Springer on Facebook is saying that the rat lungworm site says to use salted water to soak and rinse thoroughly in lots of running water when you're cleaning. I guess is that all vegetables?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can never be too careful today, especially with rat and lungworm making its way around. So especially after the rains and things that we've had. So double washing things is always recommended. Even if a packet says that it's been washed, you should wash it at least once or twice. But if there are some things you can put in the water that will help, maybe that's where the vinegar would come in handy. So a lot of places they don't have to worry about that rat lungworm, but in Hawaii we do. So yeah, I would go. Health department has some good guidelines for that. Their
okay,
website.
and then MC is saying he or she puts their herbs in olive oil. Is that, I guess, to soften them before using?
To store them or to? I mean, you can.
One of my volunteers from Thailand said the same thing when she cooks kale. She first soaks it in water with olive oil, I guess, to soften that up a little bit.
That's a good question.
Okay.
What I would say is it depends probably on how you're going to cook it. If you're planning on sauteing that kale afterwards, I would say no, because as we know, if we cook, right, water and oil come together, they tend to pop and splatter. If you're blanching it afterwards or have a large pot where you're sort of stewing it, it probably wouldn't be an issue. I'm not sure the impact that the oil would have on the green itself. If you're talking about just storing things like greens or herbs in olive oil alone, you can certainly do flavored olive oils, but you have to be careful with things like garlic, because botulism and things can form because it's anaerobic, and you're submerging items in oil where there's no oxygen, so they can tend to thrive. So just be careful and do a little research before you start trying to preserve things that way, I would say.
That's really good to know. Lotus Ann is saying that Amazon sells lime basil seeds. So Linda, try
Okay.
Amazon. And then, okay, MC is saying the reason for soaking them in the oil is to not to preserve the herb, but to flavor the oil. Okay, so.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
And then Cindy, I think this will be our last question for the day. Cindy's just saying, how and when do you use the sachet and the bouquet garni?
If you look at like classic Western stocks and sauces, that is the foundation for it. So a sachet is used in most of our classic stocks. So if you're making a chicken stock, if you're making a beef stock, a veal stock, a sachet will always be included. Some of your sauces as well, like a classic tomato sauce, will have a sachet. Sometimes a bouquet garni, it just depends on the region of Europe. But any stock or sauce, if you were making a poaching liquid that you wanted to poach fish in, you could drop in this with a slice of lemon in some water, splash of wine, let that simmer for 30 minutes, and then you flavor the water. And then when you're poaching your fish or shrimp or whatnot, that flavor will be in there. So the main purpose of that is to make sure that when we're cooking items in a liquid, that we're not pulling the flavor out of them, especially with techniques like poaching. If you poach it and it's just water, the flavor of the chicken or the shrimp or the fish is going to come out into the water. So you pull out the fish or the shrimp and you have stock or flavored water. When you use a bouquet garni or a sachet, or you flavor that water prior to cooking, now you're putting flavor into the fish or the shrimp or the chicken, if that makes sense. So any liquid type of thing, really it's just an herbal tea of sorts, and it's back notes for classic sauces and stocks.
Okay, terrific. So for those of you with gardening questions, and I've seen in the chat people offering seeds. Well, first let me say that we can't really, because of liability, AARP Hawaii can't really connect people through this for that sort of transaction. But if you're interested in gardening or trading, I do know there's a terrific Facebook group called 808 Green Thumbs. I've learned a ton, and people are trading seeds and things all the time. So you might want to check that out to find out more about gardening. There's another version of that same one that's, I believe, 808 Edible Green Thumbs, but I'm not positive on that last one. But check that out if you have questions about gardening or if you want to share things. Dan, it's been very interesting, and I hope everybody learned as much as I did. And for those of you with recipe issues, I tried to write it down. The recipe was in the 4 o'clock reminder, and it was also in the 10 a.m. reminder from about 4 days ago. So please check that first paragraph and look at it carefully. It's not a very complex recipe. So those of you who mentioned you didn't think the recipe was in the attachment, just take a look at that one more time. We hope to see you next week. And thanks again, Dan. We'll, I guess we'll be seeing Chef Gail next week, but mahalo.
All right. Have a great evening. Aloha.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Dallas.